We're filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive here in New York City. My name is Monk Rowe, and we're very pleased to have with us jazz drummer Roy McCurdy. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for coming, and I know you've been traveling quite a bit lately.
Yeah.
Can you bring us up to date on what you're doing with your career right now?
Well, right now, I'm still working with Nancy Wilson. You know, I've been doing her, working with Nancy for 16 years. So I'm still doing that. We're just getting ready to do a concert tonight. We just came from Boston, actually 4 days ago, and I just stayed up there, spent some time with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
She's up there doing a movie.
Uh-huh.
So, and I just came in this morning.
Yeah.
And
where do you go from here?
we have a concert tomorrow at Toledo, Ohio. And then Saturday we'll be back in Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, you're from Rochester, is that right?
Originally.
Rochester has been, over the years, a pretty good town for music.
Mm-hmm.
I think especially when you came up, there's some great drummers came out of Rochester. Vinnie Ruggiero and yourself, and later Steve Gadd.
Right. I used to, we used to play in Rochester, the place called the Pithod.
Yeah.
And several other places too. But I remember when Steve's father used to bring him in by the hand, let him play. He was a little guy like this, you know. And
wow.
He'd sit in and play, and he sounded great then.
Yeah.
You know? And Vinnie actually was from Massapequa, Long Island.
Oh.
And he came in later after I left. But I knew Vinnie in New York, and he played great then at that time.
I think his son is playing now too.
Yeah, he plays good too. He's one of those guys who was on the tour that we did.
All right.
I think he was with Joe Romano on that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How did you get hooked up with the Jazz Brothers?
Chuck and Gap. Well, after I came out the service, I went into the Air Force, and then I came back. I was studying at Eastman School of Music with Bill Street, a percussion teacher there. And I started working at a place called the Pithod, which was a local jazz group club up there. And they had a lot of people coming through it. And Chuck and Gap were local musicians, and I think Chuck had the band, was leading one of the local bands that was working in this club. So I think shortly after I got home out the Air Force, the drummer who was working at there, which had left or something happened to him, and a couple of days later I just went in and played that gig. And we became friends, and actually had known Chuck for a long time before I went into service. But I started working that gig, and we became friends. It was almost like family, His father had the Italian grocery store and the food and all that kind of stuff. And
didn't he always invite the visiting musicians to Rochester over to his house?
All the time.
Gillespie and...
Oh, yeah. And they would go into the store, and his mother would just put the pots on, and everybody would eat. Or we'd play upstairs with them, we'd play and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And then the group came kind of worked together a lot, and then we made a record. I think what happened is Nat Adderley, I think, heard about us. And Cannon had a series called Cannonball Adderley Presents at that time from Riverside Records. And he signed us for Riverside, and we did our first album.
It's interesting that years later.
Yeah, right.
But we'll get to that.
Right, and I remember they came up to, I don't think it was Cannon, but I think Nat came up to the Pithod and sat in the audience and listened to the band, And what happens from that is we wound up going to New York to play at the old 5-spot. There was two 5-spots at the time. The old one was in the Bowery, and then it moved over on 6th Avenue. And
about what year was this?
Probably, this was 1959. Yeah, almost 60.
Rock and roll was kind of in its infancy. Well, it had been around for a few years, but you were into the jazz.
Yeah, I was strictly into jazz at that time.
Right.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to do. I knew that was what I was going to do. I had made up my mind that was what I was going to do, And actually, that's how we met Chuck, and we just stayed. We went on the road, did little things with the band, traveled around all through the upstate New York area. in the wintertime, too, in the cold
Yeah.
trailers, and
Yeah.
it was incredible. We had a couple of good musicians, too, that came on the band. Jimmy Garrison played with us for a while. Steve Davis played bass with us for a while, so it was great. It was nice. Yeah.
When you got through the Jazz Brothers, I know other things opened up for you. Betty Carter. Was that a few years later?
No, what happened is we went to the 5 spot and played with the brothers, and then I came back to Rochester and we went back into the Pith Odd, and I got a telegram from Benny Golson, and he said he wanted me to come to New York and join the Jazz Tet, and Tootie Heath was the drummer with the Tet then, and Tootie was leaving. So great, I said, that's fantastic. So, it was about a week or so before I had to join them, and so they threw me a big party and everything at the Pith Odd, and told everybody I was going to New York. I left,
Yeah.
went to New York, and the rehearsal and the first job was in Birdland.
Wow.
And they put me up in the Elvin Hotel. It used to be Elvin Hotel, was across the street where all the musicians and everybody stayed there. So the rehearsal was that afternoon, and I went over to the rehearsal. I got there, and there was about 6 other drummers standing out there. And it turned out to be an audition, And I said, I said, wait a minute. So.
That wasn't the normal way of doing things?
Well,
was
I
it?
don't know. I thought I
You
had the
thought
job.
you had the gig,
I told everybody had left home.
You couldn't go back if you didn't get it.
Couldn't go back. Party, cake, everything. So.
Well, you certainly had an incentive to do a good audition.
So we went into Birdland, and the first thing Benny said to me, he saw me coming across the street, he says, Art, here comes the Rochester Flash. But we went down into Birdland, and everybody got a chance to play and run over the music and run through all those pretty tunes that Benny wrote, And they went in the back, and they came out later and said, you got the job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. And that night was my first gig. It's the very same night we played it.
Who else was on the band at that time?
Harold Mabern was a piano player. Bass player was Tommy Williams. I don't know if you know Tommy Williams. He was a wonderful, wonderful bass player. And he wound up, he was driving taxi cab in New York a lot, instead of playing steady, but he just played so great. Tommy Williams, myself, Gratian Moncoeur, the 3rd trombone player. And that was it. And Art and Benny and myself. Yeah.
That band record?
Yeah, we did. We did about 3 albums together at the time. Yeah, it was great.
What was recording like then as compared to now?
Well, then it was much faster. We would go into the studio here in New York, and we'd knock out an album in 3, maybe 4 hours. And that was it, Everything was like 1 or 2 takes.
Yeah.
And
but this was material that you were performing out.
Yeah, even when we played with guys that we didn't play with all the time, it was just the same way. It was, at that time, it was really incredible. You would go out and do an album, and it was 3 hours, 4 hours later, you were finished. It wasn't until years later that I went in the studio and did an album that took forever, that they took a long time on,
Was that more of a pop type?
It was with Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Uh-huh.
And it took about 6 months. Yeah, it went from city to city. Every place we played, we'd go into a studio and record.
Oh. And not the whole band wouldn't be there, right? It might just be you and the bass player or something.
Oh, it'd
like
be
that.
the whole band.
No
Because the whole
kidding.
band was traveling together.
But I mean, when you were recording, did you do it all at once? Or were you,
Yeah. We started out, Bobby Colomby had a studio here outside of New York in a home of his. And he had different rooms in the studio, and have different people in the band would be in different rooms. And you were connected by video camera, But that album took a long time to do,
Was that a different situation for you, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, than come up before?
Well, yeah, it was. Well, we had been playing with Cannonball, like a little funk and stuff like that. We had been playing several types of music. So when Cannon passed, I started working with Kenny Rankin, and then we were in San Francisco, and they called. So, but I was kind of ready for that because I had been playing
Right.
a lot of that different kind of
Yeah.
music and stuff.
How did the thing with Adderley's come about? Did you step in after, was it Louis Hayes?
Yeah.
was
Well,
playing?
what had happened is I was in New York for a while. I had moved down from, and I played with the Tet, and I had played with Betty Carter, and I had played with Mitchell and Ruff, and Sonny Rollins. I had been with Sonny for quite a while. And then in 63, I went back home. I was married, my first marriage, and I was trying to save this marriage, and I went back to Rochester, and I took a job in, I just stopped playing. I took a job at Eastman Kodak as a film tester.
Yeah, I think half of Rochester worked at Eastman.
Yeah.
The other one is at Xerox.
Working in the dark every day, these big rolls of
Oh
film.
my.
And listening to the jazz on the radio, hearing myself on albums and things.
Was that the Harry Abraham show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, actually, Harry, but before that time it was called Will Moyle.
Yeah.
A guy named Will Moyle
On
had it.
HM, yeah. You're listening to yourself.
And I'm saying, what am I doing
Oh.
here? I'm in this place, and so it was I had been there almost a year, and I got several calls. I mean, Horace wanted me to come out, and a couple other guys wanted me to come. And then this big change came with Cannon. Louis Hayes was leaving to go with Oscar Peterson. And Cannon called, and he said, his exact words were, "Fool." He says, "I want you to come join my band." So I said, "Oh, man. So what am I going to do about this?"
Oh.
I'm really tired of Kodak. And so I talked to my wife, told her I was thinking about going, But I talked to the guys, the guys on the block that I grew up with, and I told them, and they said, "If you don't go, we ain't go,
Yeah.
we're gonna, you better go."
Oh, man.
Because, they had been
Yeah.
proud. I had been playing with all these guys, and
Right.
we had grown up together, and they knew that. So I told her, I said, "Listen, I'm going to go to New York," and I just went, and I joined Cannon, and it was great, man.
That was great. 10 years, right?
12, almost 12.
12 years.
Yeah. It took me about almost a month before my playing chops were back together, but he
Oh.
was very, very patient and said, "Yeah, and it was great and great." And finally, we just clicked, and we had a great
Oh.
time, good relationship.
Some classic albums.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you about a couple that I think really stand out. One was with Nancy. That was before you, but the one I'm thinking.
The second one.
Yeah.
That was one we were doing for Capitol Records in Los Angeles. We were doing a live recording. What they used to do at Capitol is they used to take the big studio, I think it was Abe's studio, it's huge, and they make it into a nightclub.
Mm.
They'd put a bar in there, drinks, and they'd call people and tell them Cannon's recording. Well, by the time we did our third album, it was just a crowd outside the Capitol Records, trying to get in for this thing.
Yeah.
But we were recording, and Nancy was in the audience, and Lou Rawls was in the audience, and Cannon called them both up to just spontaneously to do some things, and they came up and did it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure did.
Yeah.
There was some great piano players, too, through the
Yeah.
band, of course.
Oh yeah.
When tunes like, Mercy, Mercy and stuff, when you would read those in rehearsal, and did you get a sense of this tune is going to sell a lot of records?
Yeah, we were hoping. We were always experimenting. That band was experimenting all the time, and we played straight ahead jazz. We played all kinds of stuff. So when Joe brought that tune in, Zavino, I think we were rehearsal in Teaneck, New Jersey. We used to rehearse in Nat Adderley's basement out there.
Is that from the song Teaneck he wrote?
Yeah, I guess. And I lived out there too. I moved out there
Yeah.
eventually. But a lot of musicians were in that area, in Teaneck. But when he brought that tune in, he says, "Listen to this," and he started playing it, And we were just starting to get into the electronics, you know, where we were using the electric piano, and we had a Wurlitzer that we wanted to use, you know. And he played this tune, and we said, yeah, let's try it. And we rehearsed it and got it together and went and tried it, and people loved it. You know? They loved it, you know. There was a lot of things. Joe was amazing because he heard a lot of different things way before things like, you know, electronic things like bending notes and all that kind of thing. And he used to shake the piano and be bending notes. I mean, wow. And wish he had these little things, gadgets, and finally all these things would come in, you know. Yeah. Went from Wurlitzer to the Rhodes.
The Rhodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a specific album you got, Country Preacher, and there's a tune on, the title tune on that thing. And the most amazing thing happens, that this was a live thing, it was Operation Breadbasket or something. Right. Jesse Jackson's
he was the country preacher.
Yeah. And you play this tune, and there's a, in the middle of the song, it builds and builds, and then it shuts off. Right. And then the piano comes back in, and the crowd
they love that.
Goes nuts.
That pause.
I just had to, what was that?
It was just
I get chills listening to that. I can't imagine what it was like to be there.
It was just a pause, you know, that we'd have where we had this space with this tension in it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know, did you ever see Cannon and that live? I mean, Cannon and that band live? Yeah. They were really funny to me, you know, because I was behind them all the time. You're looking at them, you know, and his brother was short and Cannon was tall. And they had a way of snapping their fingers and moving, and their behinds were in sync, you know, and they would and they would be snapping, and the behinds would be in sync. And during that pause, that's what was going on, you know. They had that little sync thing going on, and then they go back and hit it, you know. Joe would hit it, and the people loved that thing. It was kind of a follow-up to Mercy, Mercy, Mercy thing, you know. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really nice.
It's almost as if you guys were creating a style as you went along.
Yeah, it was.
Did you have a name for it, or did you let other people name it?
We just let other people name it. We just called it, you know, it was just music for us, you know. We didn't want to be in one particular slot all the time, you know, like just straight ahead jazz or something like that. We wanted to be able to do all kinds of things and have some fun. And not only did we do different, like funk and soul and gospel and jazz. We also experimented with different time figures and things too at that time, like 7/4 time, 5/4 time, and things like that. You know, which were when we did 74 Miles Away. That album was it was 7/4 time, and then George Duke came up with a tune in 5/4 that we did, and it was great. Yeah, he was one of the wonderful piano players that came through. Joe Zavino. George Duke, Hal Galper, who else? George Hal, and then there was Mike Wolf came on the band. I don't know if you know Mike. He was the musical director for our Arsenio Hall show. Oh. But he was our last piano player. Larry Willis was on the band for a while.
And he was with Blood, Sweat, and Tears too, wasn't he, later on?
Yeah, Larry was with it. Actually, I think Larry recommended me for that job because he was on there before me, you know. Yeah.
That one record you did, The Black Messiah, I think it was. There was some interesting stuff on that too. Yeah. Music from that. Didn't they write a Broadway show called John Henry or something? Yeah, some of the things. But that was an album we were working on, a show we were working on called Big Man. Big Man, yeah. Which was like about John Henry and Cannon and that were writing all the music for. They had written all the music for that. We recorded it actually, but before we could get the show off the ground, he passed away. Yeah. So, yeah, that was beautiful. What's the road like for your aspiring musicians? You know, the guys today? Being on the road. Yeah. Oh. Good and bad. I'm sure it is. You know, I really don't. I don't know about the young guys today. What they're about the road is like. I can tell you what it's like for me, but but in those days. Oh, you mean in those days? Yeah. It was fun. It was fun. It was exciting to me. It was anyway. When I first went out on with the jazz tent and people like that. I mean, we would jump in. This wasn't too much fun, but we would jump in cars and station wagons, and we'd travel all over the country. You know. Also,
when I would join Cannonball, they were doing that before we started flying. But once we got in town and started playing and got these different places, I mean, we had a great time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was. I did because I was learning all the time, meeting people all the time, learning how to play my instrument and things like that. So it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never got tired of it. It wasn't like being on the road in a bus
With a big band.
with a big band and things like that. You know, it was just a few of us, and we only did the cars for a while, and then we started flying every place. You know, so it was good.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't bad.
Did you ever have an opportunity to play behind Joe Williams?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I love Joe.
Yeah.
We did an album with Cannon and Joe.
Right,
a
that live
thing.
record.
Yeah, for Fantasy, I believe
Yeah.
it was.
He did some nasty blues on that
Yeah,
record.
yeah. But I've worked with Joe several times. I really love him. I really love the way he sings, and you know, he lays it down. So he's a hard swinger, so he's perfect for the drums. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Betty Carter was like that too. Yeah,
She's really, I think, one of the truest of jazz singers.
she is.
would you have
Yeah,
to
she can
say.
sing. Yeah, she can sing. But
Right.
we used to work together a long time ago with Harold Mabern
Mhm.
and Bob Cranshaw. And
You just missed Bob.
with Bob, yeah.
He said hello.
He did, yeah. That's my man. With Bob and Harold, and then I think Ron Carter did it for a while, and myself. And as a matter of fact, Betty, first time I went to Japan, Betty was on that tour with Sonny Rollins. It was Sonny's quartet, and Betty
Mhm.
was singing on it, yeah.
And what about overseas? You've been overseas a number of times.
Yeah. I loved Europe. They really liked the music so much, especially in the 60s and 70s. The jazz was just so big, and we did a lot of playing over there. I stayed in Paris for a while and lived over there for a little while playing
Mhm.
with Marcel Salal, piano player. I had a good time with him. Guy Pedersen. Couldn't speak no language, but we were over there playing, running on the road.
Wow. So the music just kind of took care of that.
Yeah, music
Yeah.
took care of that. And then I traveled through a lot of the countries, all the Scandinavian countries and places like that, Germany, all those European countries. Then over to the Orient, you know. In Japan, the music is still incredible. It's their first music,
Yeah,
jazz, you know.
Bob said he just got back from there with Sonny Rollins.
Yeah, it's incredible. I was just telling somebody the other day, we just got back from there not too long ago
Mhm.
too, and we were in the Keio Plaza in Tokyo, and when you go out to your hotel, all the music that's piped in the hotel is all hard jazz, straight ahead jazz. So,
Oh.
but it was nothing on the radio. I used to have to come in the hall and listen in the hallway, man. It was incredible. I mean, you're hearing Joe Henderson and out there, and all those people out there when you're waiting for the elevator.
Mhm.
In the department stores, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Do they have, what's the traditional Japanese music that they have their own rock and roll, don't they? Or pop music?
Well, I'm
Or
sure they
did you
do.
get
Yeah,
the opportunity to hear it.
Yeah, they do. They have but you know, they got all that from us, though.
Yeah.
When we first went
Yeah.
over there, they were listening to us to get all that stuff. We used to go to Japan. You'd pull up at the airport, and it'd be like 300-400 people waiting outside with signs and things, welcoming you to Japan.
Wow.
In the lobby, just like rock and roll. And the musicians were all with you all the time. They were learning the music. Now they have very wonderful musicians, but they got it all from us.
Mhm.
But they're playing wonderful. They got great musicians over there, of all kinds of music, rock, jazz, whatever it is. They get onto it very fast.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of your experiences with studio work on the West Coast.
Studio. Well, I haven't done too many shows and things like that. Most of the things I do in studio in West Coast are recordings.
Yeah.
I go in and do recordings, and that's, just like all recordings, we go in and do those, and they're fun, and we do them with a lot of different people and things. Actually, when I first went to California, when I moved out there because Cannonball had a show, and it was a variety show, the same kind of show as Johnny Carson. Did you know that?
Cannonball did?
Sure. And it was on NBC, and it came on after the Johnny Carson show. He had the same kind of guests. He had a co-host, which was a lady. He sat behind the desk and everything. And he did all kinds of things, from playing to dancing to
I can't
interviewing all
believe
these.
this.
Oh, it was incredible. That's why we went to there, because we went out to do this show, to be with the band. See? And I was just talking to somebody not too long ago. We would love to see some of those tapes from them old shows.
I guess so.
You know? And then, after Cannon left, it went on for almost a year. And after he left, it became like, I think Nancy had that show. It became Nancy Wilson Show or something like that. And then Lou Rawls had it, came and went to Lou Rawls, but it was a wonderful, wonderful show.
Well, he had that gift of...
And he could talk to anybody.
Yeah.
He had all the same people. I mean, all the actors and musicians and people like that were his guests and things, and he would interview them with his co-host.
Yeah.
Had a band. It was great. It was the same thing.
The group visited colleges quite often, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what we were doing in 70. Well, actually, we started around 73. By 75, just before Cannon passed, we were doing a lot of colleges, doing clinics, doing concerts. We go and do a clinic one day. We go and work with the different instruments, and then we do a concert the next day. And we talk to people in assemblies about jazz.
Yeah.
The history of jazz, about jazz and things like that. Now, that's strange, you know, coming from behind your instrument to give a speech.
Yeah.
About music. I mean, you're never nervous. I was never nervous playing drums.
You've got that...
But you come from behind those drums and start talking. That's something else. You know, that's really, you know, the podium, and you look and there's all these folks staring at you.
Well, how do you say, well, here's what I do?
Yeah,
The
first time I ever did it, Joe Zavino teases me about this today, and that too. Because, you know, I kind of swore the first time. I mean, they were talking, and Cannon was giving his thing in which he could really talk. I mean, he could really talk good. Then Nat would do his thing. And they said, well, McCurdy, tell him something about, you know, when you first came up to be a drummer. And I said, well, and I went up to the podium. I said, you know, hip. Well, shit, when I first came up, and they all just fell out. And they teased me about that today. They said, you know, I haven't lived that down.
I bet people were paying attention after that anyway.
You know, I was talking like I talk in the street.
Yeah.
I was talking in the street. You know, and they all cracked up. The audience cracked up and everything, you know, which was cool because it helped me to relax. But they tell me about that all the time.
Can we get him at the school, Mike? Recreate that scene. That's great.
Have you talked to Joe or anybody like that? To Zavino?
No, I'd love to.
Yeah, he lives in town.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, he still talks about it. He'll tell you, he'll really elaborate on this thing. Yeah.
Well, Nat, just to mention, had told us some great stories about some of the songs he wrote and how they all had things behind them. You know, they weren't just contrived. He played from his experience.
Right.
That's what I think that was so great about the Cannonballs group, is you had some different influences happening. You know, you had a piano player from Austria to put a different take in on some of the
and
music.
to bring in different feelings and different kind of time signatures and things. Because, you know, Joe used to play accordion in like polka bands and things like that. You know? So he used to talk about that, you know, and how he would relate that to jazz and all that kind of things, all those kind of different things like that. And I'm sure Nat was right. I mean, they wrote a lot of things that had a lot to do with their background, like the gospel things we did. You know, I'm sure it was a big part of their Florida background and things like that, you know, and Cannon and them. I'm sure it was. I never heard them talk about it, but I guess it was. Yeah.
Was your family musical?
Well, my father played a little piano, but he just for himself. And my mother did too, and they just did it at home.
Yeah.
But no, my father was a caterer and things like that. He had a caterer. But my sister supported me for music, and she bought me my first instrument and stuff like that. Yeah. My cousin used to play like drums and in the Elks Marching Band, and I used to see those drums around it. But music was around the house all the time. I mean, the records were playing all the time, so I always heard the music and stuff like that, you know.
Right.
So I was around it all the time to listen to it, yeah.
And you've been with Nancy for what, you said 16 years now?
Yeah, about 16 years
Wow.
now. Yeah, long time.
I wish someone could make up a chart about how musicians have moved from one group to the other. I mean,
I know.
you mentioned Bob Cranshaw, and he played with Sonny Rollins, and you played with Sonny Rollins.
Oh, yeah.
And it gets very complicated, but, you know, word gets out who's good. I
Oh,
guess.
yeah, and everybody moves into the, yeah, it kind of intertwines there, yeah. Even when you're playing with local people, if you're playing out Los Angeles, just around local people, it seems to be the same musicians playing with different groups all the time. You know, they're just kind of interchanging all the time, yeah.
Is there a difference in these days in the feel of jazz on the West Coast and in New York?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I hate to say that. Yeah, I think so. Music is still played hard here. They dig in hard, they play hard. You know, there's a lot of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tend to play out there, I usually play a little lighter than I would like usually. You know, when I come back here, I naturally dig in because it's the way the guys play back here.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I think it's the feeling is a little different. The music is good on both sides, but I think the feeling of playing it is a little bit different. Yeah, yeah.
Who
It's
do you
always
listen
been-
to these days? What do you like?
Well, you know, I like a lot of the young guys that are playing. You know, there's a lot of the young drummers. They're really good drummers out there. Carl Allen, I love Carl, the way he plays. I love Gregory Hutchins and Herlin Riley. All those guys, they play so good, you know. And, you know, and all the guys that they play with, you know, I try to keep up with all that, listen to it. Yeah. But I listen to all the good guys.
What about styles of music? Is there anything happening now that you react to one way or the other?
Not really. I don't think so. I still love jazz first.
Yeah.
But I listen to and try to keep up with all kinds of music because I have to play all kinds of music in different situations a lot of times. So I try to keep on top of all that, you know. But if I sit down or go into a store to buy some music, I'm going into the jazz section first.
Yeah.
You know, sure. That's my love.
When you were getting into drums, who were the first people that really grabbed you back then?
When I first started listening, I was listening to probably Shelley, man. When I first started listening, Shelley, guys like that. And then a friend of mine turned me on to, well, actually we were listening to a lot of West Coast music at that time because we were listening to Kenton, and we were listening to, you know, Bob Cooper, all those kind of groups like that, you know, Pete Jolly, all those kind of people. And then a friend of mine came over with the Art Blakey album, you know, the Jazz Messengers, one of the 12-inch things. You know. It was done at Birdland, actually. And I said, wow, you know. Then I started listening to Art. And I was listening to Max back then, too, I must say. And Philly Joe Jones, people like that, Kenny Clark. Those were all guys that I was listening to all the time. All those kind of guys I was listening to constantly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Buying records with anything they were on, I was getting them. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to say that you were on some of the records that made me go, oh, wow.
Is that right?
At the
Oh,
time,
that's great.
yeah.
That's great. Well, you know, I tell you, I always wanted to do this, you know. And when I was in the service, sitting in Alaska in the barracks in Fairbanks, it was 50 below zero outside, you know. And we'd have the records on. We'd play jazz all the time. And I'd always
Help
be
keep you warm.
yeah, I was saying, wow, I wonder if I'm ever going to be playing with these guys, you know. So You
Well-
know, it was great for me too to get up and finally be able to do that. You know.
So you didn't have a musical experience in the service like some guys actually made out pretty well.
Well, I did. Yeah,
Did you?
that's what I did in the service. I was
Oh.
with I was in special services. I was in the band, and we traveled around and we just did shows all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we traveled all through that northern area where it was freezing, and,
Wow.
and we did all these elaborate shows, stage shows and things. And then we had a big jazz band and big band jazz band, and we had small group jazz band. And in Fairbanks, they had, Fairbanks at that time was like the Wild West. You know, it was 1956, and it was a territory then. It wasn't even a state, it hadn't even turned statehood. And all the gangsters, everything was up there because they could get away, you know.
Okay.
They would run away from the states, and they wouldn't be brought back because it hadn't turned statehood. As soon as it turned statehood, they all had to cut out, you know. But they had clubs. It was just full of clubs and things. So there was 2 or 3 jazz clubs, and we used to work like 6 nights a week in these jazz clubs too. Yeah, up there.
You know, it's funny that the jazz has seemed to help by corruption in the government and so
something? Yeah,
forth. Because
yeah.
you had Kansas City with that whole era there, and you had Chicago
Yeah.
and Capone's era, and you know Milt Hinton talks about how much work there was at that point. And now you're telling us in Alaska.
Oh yeah, in Alaska there must have been about 3, maybe 4 clubs that had jazz full time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they were always packed. You know, we played there. When we finished with our duties in the Air Force, I'd go pack up and go in town to play. Get home about 2 in the morning and go back to what I was doing. You know? Yeah. I met a piano player up there. He was out of Baltimore, out of New York actually. His name was Roger Fleming, one of the greatest piano players I had ever heard. And I had lost track. I never knew what happened, but he played like in the Wynton Kelly mode, and he was just an incredible. I thought for sure that he was going to be a huge, huge star, you know. And then when I left there, that was it. I never found him again.
No.
Yeah, I never what happened. But they had those kind of players were up there, you know. Yeah.
How long were you? A couple of years in the service?
I was I was supposed to be in for 4 years. I got out in 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
They had this early out thing, so
Yeah. I'll take it.
I'll take it. I got out 3.5. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was great.
Any recording coming up in the near future for you?
What have we done? I haven't done anything in a while because we've been so busy traveling with Nancy and things. I think she's getting ready to go in the studio. I'm not sure if I'm going to do anything with that or not, but she's getting ready to do some things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of situation do you like to record in? You like to do it mostly live? Is that how you've done most of your recording?
Mostly everything is been live. But there's been some things where we just go in and put the rhythm tracks down, and they come in and do some other things afterwards.
Right.
But most of the things have been live. I like it like that. I like to hear everything together. You know, see what's going to be. You know.
You feel more connected to everybody, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so. You know, we did this I think it was about a year and a half ago. We did this Scott Hamilton thing. It was just beautiful. They brought all the strings in the studio, and the rhythm section, and it was just beautiful. It came out great. I don't know if you heard that Scott Hamilton with strings or not.
Yeah. In fact, he was just at our college.
Was he? Yeah. We had a good time with that.
Yeah.
It was all live. Usually, they'll bring the rhythm section and then bring the strings in another time, but this time it was all together. It was great.
And that Kenny Rankin thing must have been kind of a change.
Oh yeah, I
After
forgot. We just did
Cannonball,
that. We
10
just
years.
finished that. Yeah. Well, Kenny's beautiful. I love the way he sings. You know, and he decided to get away from not play much guitar on this album, and he got myself and Mike Wolford and Brian Bromberg, and he just stood up and sang on this album. It was great. As a matter of fact, we went out and did a few dates like that. It's yeah, he's beautiful.
He does have a unique sounding voice.
Oh yeah. He's a wonderful musician. I've done about 4 or 5 albums with him, with Don Costa and strings and different things like that. I love Kenny. He's a beautiful guy. Yeah, he's sort of a cult figure, I think.
Yeah.
It's my man.
Any any words of wisdom or experience to young musicians coming out today?
Well, you know, I just can tell them what the guys used to tell me is just to listen to everything you can hear, that you can get your hands on. Listen to all different types of music. And, you know, play as much as you can, you know. And for me, I'm a gym guy. So I like to be in the gym a lot. So I think that's really helped me over the years for being strong and for playing and for being on the road and keeping healthy, you know. You know, I don't drink or smoke or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's the physical thing in the gym has really been a really big part of helping me
I think
survive
it works.
out here.
I told you you didn't
Yeah.
look much different on this record from. You said this was about almost 30 years ago. Was that?
Yeah,
let's
well,
see.
Nancy and I are getting ready to hit our big one next year. We're both gonna turn 60, you know. So I'm about 4 months older than she is.
Yeah.
So she likes to tell me that, you know. But we're gonna have a big party next year. At least, you know, to
Wonderful.
celebrate that one. Yeah.
Well, this has really been a pleasure for
Hey,
us.
Fun. I hope I told you some good things.
Yeah, you did. And I hope we can get to hear you play tonight, too.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it should be any problem. Should be able to do that.
All right.
Yeah.
On behalf of Hamilton College, I'd like to thank Roy McCurdy for sharing his experiences with us. Have a good gig.
Thank you. All
All right.
right. Loved it. All right.